we're actually going to continue our series in the book of Daniel. And last time we actually talked about Daniel chapter 1. This week we're going to be in Daniel chapter 3. And so our series title that we're in is called Jesus, or Living for Jesus in a Jesusless World. And this week's title is called Even If He Doesn't. Grab your neighbor and say, even if he doesn't. Even if he doesn't. Some of you can't reach your neighbor. Even if he doesn't. And so right now, just kind of based off kind of where the story goes tonight, right now, I've told you guys a lot about the app Hoopla. Love the app Hoopla. So right now, I am listening to another audiobook called I Am In. Show of hands. Anybody ever heard the book I Am In? I can't even say it. Courtney's that? No, that's no hand. Okay, so nobody's ever heard of the book called I Am In. And so basically what it is, it's actually very similar to the book that I had talked to you guys about several weeks back with Stephen, when I preached on Stephen the Martyr, and the book called Jesus Freak Martyrs. So it's very similar to that one, but actually what the I Am In actually means is, so what ISIS militants would do in the Middle East is they would go to these homes and these churches, and they would write an N on the church, or they would write an N on one of these homes. So what this signified that these were followers of Jesus of Nazareth. So when they would do this, obviously these were Christian homes, but this also meant that they were targets. That they were targets for these radical Muslim groups. And so not only were they targets, they had an option. Two options, actually. One of those options is, one, they could simply leave. The second one is they can pay a tax for being a Christian in that area. And it was supposed to allow them to be safe. But in reality, even though they paid a tax, doesn't necessarily mean they were going to be safe. And so you actually kind of see in this book, and it's got several different stories, and I've actually almost finished listening to it. You hear several ones, and they're very grotesque. They're very heartbreaking stories about people being hacked with machetes because they're Christians, people being shot because they're Christians. I mean, there's or you have, like, for instance, can you imagine having the job that you have currently and your boss finding out that you're a Christian and they say, because you're a Christian, you're no longer employed here? Like, that's what these people are going through. And there was one particular story about an 11-year-old boy who was in his school, and he was being bullied. Like, at 11 years old, like, you don't know a whole lot about life. And he was going around and professing and talking about Jesus and his Christian faith that him and his family has. But obviously this was a radical Muslim area, and so he was getting bullied, and he was getting picked on by all these kids at school. And another 11-year-old boy told him, hey, we're going to kill you if you don't stop that, at 11 years old. And so obviously this alarmed the father, and the father was like, hey son, now let's maybe tone this down a little bit. And then a little while, and the story goes on, the father felt convicted because his son was more passionate about his faith at 11 years old than he was as a grown adult. So he actually went to the child's father that said, hey, I'm going to kill you if you don't stop doing that. And so when the father went to that child's father, guess what that father did? That father threatened him that he would kill him because he's a Christian if he didn't go away and leave his house. And so you see stories like that, and you see instances like that in the book of En, and it's really heartbreaking. And not only that, that same school, he was being beaten by his school professors or his teachers because he would not write, there is no God but Allah. And so they ended up pulling him out of that school. And their book itself is really, it's just heartbreaking to read some of that, to know that stuff like that is going on in today's society and today's culture around the world. We live in our Christian, bubble sometimes, I think, here in the United States. And, I talked about before how fortunate we are to be able to have the opportunities that we have. And so what you see in these stories is in the book of En, these people are faced with decisions. They are faced with a circumstance where they have to make a decision. Do I follow Jesus or do I deny him? Because if they just deny Jesus, then there's never an issue, there's never a problem. They go on with their life and they live in peace with these other Muslims. And so in our story in Daniel chapter 3, we have something very similar to what is going on in that book. we have something going on. This is pretty much the same situation with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Have you guys ever heard of those guys? You ever heard Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? So those are our main characters in the story tonight, which they were also featured in Daniel chapter 1. And they're going to be faced with a similar situation, whether they deny God or they stand for Him. And that's what we're going to see. So we're going to be in Daniel chapter 3, verse 1. And we're actually going to do kind of the same thing. We're going to go verse by verse. We're just going to kind of look at the story, and we're just going to kind of dissect it a little bit and see what's happening, and just ask God's Word to just begin to speak to the hearts and lives of each and every one of us in this place. So giving you guys a little bit of time to get there. And the first one is in Daniel chapter 3, verse 1. And it says this: King Nebuchadnezzar. I think I'm going to start calling him King Nebi, by the way. So if I start saying King Nebi, that's King Nebuchadnezzar. It's a little shorter, a little easier to say, except for when I read from the Bible, I'll say Nebuchadnezzar. But verse 1 says this: King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold, whose height was 60 cubits, and its breadth is 6 cubits, and he set it up in the plain of Dura. Does anybody know where the plain of Dura is? I don't know where the plain of Dura is. But it says, in the province of Babylon. Now, I want you guys to know, does anybody know how big a cubit is? I know it's not really terms that we use today. No, most of us don't know what a cubit. So I looked it up. A cubit is about 18 inches. So this thing says it was 60 cubits in height, and its breadth was 6 cubits. So it was about 90 feet tall and about 9 feet wide. So this is a pretty massive object that's being set up. And actually, in the plains of Dura, they actually found today that there's actually this huge platform there, and I want to say it's about 20 feet high and 45 feet wide. It's one of the spots where they actually believe that this actual statue was erected. And so not only was it a huge statue, it was most likely believed that the statue was made of wood, and it was covered in gold on top of it. So it wasn't completely solid gold, but it was completely surrounded in gold. So this statue is the focal point of this story in this particular text. And going on in verse 2, then King Nebi sent to gather the satraps, the prefects, and the governors and the counselors, the treasurers, the justice, the magistrates, and all the officials in the province to come detection of the image of King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So King Nebuchadnezzar is the main person who is having this image set up. So he is wanting this. He is bringing these people in, not just everybody, but like all the important people, the people who are anybody are showing up at this thing. And I'm sure there's other people showing up too as well. And in verse 3 it says, then the satraps, the prefects, and the governors, and the counselors, and the treasurers of the justice, the magistrates, and all the officials in the province gathered for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. And also you see here going on, it says, and they stood before the image Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Verse 4, and herald proclaimed aloud, you are commanded, O people and nations and languages. Now let me ask you a question. Some of you guys have kids. Some of you guys don't have kids. When you give a command, like when you say, hey, little Timmy, I want you to eat your vegetables. And little Timmy doesn't eat his vegetables, what do? Like, you just keep trying to make him eat his vegetables, right? I'm not a parent, I have little Timmy. But you know what I mean? Like, when you say something, like, you're not gonna, you're gonna make a command, but you're probably not gonna kill your kid if he doesn't eat a vegetable. Am I right? Hopefully, show of hands, not gonna kill your kid if he doesn't eat a vegetable. But when King Nebuchadnezzar, he makes a command, it's not of hey, do you guys want to? Here's a suggestion. He's saying, no, when you hear this music and you hear this noise, my command is this. You're going to bow down. And so you see this command that King Nebuchadnezzar has made. And in verse 5 it says, and when they hear the sound, the horn, the pipe, the lyre, the trigon, the harp, the bagpipe, and every kind of music, you are to fall down and worship the golden image. So here's what they're supposed to do when they hear this sound. And King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. So I don't know if you guys know this. A few years back, I did a sermon about worship. And going into the sermon, I thought I knew everything about worship. I love praise and worship. I love everything about it. But when I actually began to look at the word worship in the Greek, the actual word worship, and some of you heard me say this before, is that the word worship means to bow down. And so when you see this, that's what when you see the Bible, when you see the word worship, a lot of times they're talking about bowing down physically. And so he's saying, fall down and worship the golden image that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. And I don't know about you guys, in our culture and in our society today, like when we see images, we don't always think like, hey, I want to worship that chair. That's a nice chair. I really like that chair. Like to us, like worshiping an object doesn't make a lot of sense. Because that's kind of the way our culture is wired. But in reality, our culture, we worship other things. We worship different things in different ways. For some of us, or especially in our country today, I was looking up statistics, pornography is something that we as a culture, we worship greatly. And, a lot of times you say where your money goes, that's what you worship. And I was actually looking at some statistics, and the pornography industry actually is worth about $97 billion as of in 2017. And not only that, it actually makes more money than Major League Baseball, the NFL, and the NBA combined. For Hollywood, they actually produce 600 movies a year, and this is in 2017, and they make about $10 billion a year. The pornography industry produces about 13,000 movies a year and makes over $15 billion a year. And I think one of the most tragic things that I've learned about the pornography industry is simply this, that 1/3 of all pornography is a direct result of sex trafficking around the world. So people's lives are being destroyed because this very thing is making so much money around the world. You have children that are being abducted. You have grown adults that are being abducted, and they're being forced in these industries. And because people can look at somebody on a computer screen and see these things, people around the world, their lives are being destroyed because of it. And so we may not worship physical images, but we worship a computer screen of somebody that we'll never meet or will ever get to know. And so we can set up idols in our own lives that can cause destruction and death. And verse 6 says this, and whoever does not fall down and worship shall be immediately cast in the burning fiery furnace. I don't know about you guys, that doesn't sound like a good thing, am I right? Like going into a burning fiery furnace is not my ideal on what is today, August 8th. I don't want to do that. Now I'll pass on that. And I actually got a picture of what this burning fiery furnace may have actually looked like. Looks like a little teepee is kind of what it looks like, but it's actually, and this is what they believe that it could look like, something very similar. And I actually, in this, you see this here, it talks about how when they were making the golden image, that this may be what they used to help create the gold. And so you see something, and when you really go online, you'll see different pictures, but they're all kind of similar to this in the story. And verse 7 says this, therefore, everybody say therefore. As soon as all the people heard the sound of the horn, the pipe, the lyre, the trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music, all the people and nations and languages fell down and worshipped. And then it says, in the golden image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up, notice this, everybody around them is worshiping this image. And I want to tell you something today. Just because everybody around you is doing something doesn't mean you should take part in it. Am I correct? Like just because someone else is doing it, like old saying, if he jumped off a bridge, would you jump off a bridge? It's like, well, how high is the bridge? You know what I mean? Like, just because they jump off a bridge doesn't mean it's something that you should be doing. So you see, everyone is taking part of this. And therefore, at that time, certain Chaldeans came forward and immediately maliciously accused the Jews. So we learn in Daniel chapter 1 that you have Babylon, and they took these Jewish captives, and they took the nobles and the youths and the good-looking and the wise. And King Nebuchadnezzar put these youths in his house, in his palace. And so you can imagine being a Babylonian, and then you have Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who is a country that you've taken over, and now these people are in influential positions. So you can see there's probably a lot of racism in this story about the different people groups coming together and serving. And you see they maliciously accused the Jews. So it wasn't like they came in here like, hey, I really don't want to do this, but like they weren't convicted because they weren't bowing down to the statue. They're like, hey, here's our opportunity. Here's what we can do. We can try to get them with King Nebuchadnezzar. Verse 9 says this, then they declared to King Nebuchadnezzar, "O king, live forever. Don't forget to give the king a little, prop. Good job, king. Here we are. We're here for you. You, O king, have made a decree. Don't forget what you said. And that every man who hears the sound of the horn, the pipe, the lyre, the trigon, harp, bagpipe, every kind of music." Any of you guys ever play those? You guys play those instruments that I just labeled off? Anybody play those? The trigon, the harp, or the bagpipe? We need a bagpipe player up here. I was talking about, me and Erica were talking last night about we got a harmonica and how funny if you have like a 30-minute harmonica worship set on a Thursday or Sunday. So that would be, Kayla's like, nah, not happening. You would definitely have to be in the spirit for that to happen. But so we won't be having a harmonica worship set. But going on, it says, every kind of music shall fall down and worship the golden image. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast into the burning fiery furnace. So remember, this is not a suggestion, this is command. There are certain Jews whom you have appointed over the affairs of the province of Babylon. So they're important. These are people, they're in political positions. And it says Shadrach, Meshach, say that again, and Abednego. Say that again. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So we're jogging childhood memories here. And it says, these men, O king, pay no attention to you. So now they've made it personal. They're like, hey, just want to let you know, king, we want to know, you made a decree, we love you. But these people, they don't pay attention to you at all. And it says, they do not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. So they made this whole thing personal to King Nebi. And one thing about King Nebuchadnezzar is he doesn't take no for an answer very well. You know what I mean? Like he doesn't take no very well. And it says this, then Nebuchadnezzar in a furious rage. And one thing that you'll see is King Nebuchadnezzar can go from 0 to 60 and like that. Like he's an individual that can lose his cool and lose his temper like no one else. And the one thing that we understand too is that God actually put all men and all beasts under King Nebuchadnezzar. Did you guys know that? Like King Nebuchadnezzar is literally the most powerful human being in all of the world at this time. So he's not used to people telling him no. And it says, going on, he commanded that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be brought. So notice the accusation is not in their presence. It's when they're not present. But this is kind of interesting because King Nebuchadnezzar actually does something that's somewhat wise. And he says, so they brought these men before the king. Verse 14, Nebuchadnezzar answered and said to them, is it true? So notice King Nebuchadnezzar just didn't take these people's words for it. He wanted to find out if this accusation is actually true. So even though he went from 0 to 60, like he had somewhat wisdom to say, hey guys, this is what's been said. Is this true? And so here's the response. O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, says this, that you do not serve my gods or worship the golden image that I have set up. Notice the key word that he keeps bringing up in there. I. Me. He didn't say me in there. So they can serve my gods or the worship the image that I have set up. But you guys know what I mean. Like he's making this all about him. This is what I have done. And verse 15 says, now if you're ready, when you hear the sound of the horn, the pipe, the lyre, the trigon, the harp, the bagpipe, and every kind of music to fall down and worship the image that I have made. Well and good. But if you do not worship, you shall be immediately cast in the burning fiery furnace. Now, then think about this next statement that he says. And who is the God who will deliver you out of my hands? Think about that. Who is the God that will deliver you out of my hands? Now we know in Daniel chapter 1 that God gave Jerusalem and Judah into his hands. And the power that King Nebuchadnezzar has been given, God has given it to him. And King Nebuchadnezzar is really, if you think about it, he's kind of a religious guy. Am I right? Like he's wanting them to worship this image, this statue, 90 feet by 9 feet. So he has a polytheist mindset, which means he worships multiple gods. But what is the one God that King Nebuchadnezzar worships most? Himself. So you see that in this story. So even though King Nebuchadnezzar is setting up these images, he's worshiping, the God he serves mostly is himself. Doesn't that sound like our society a little bit today? In our culture, the people that are in our nation today, at times, well, we don't worship a God, but what they secretly believe is they secretly worship themselves, their own desire, their own wants, their own needs, their own desires. In verse 16, I love the response that we have the Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego say. It says, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, "O Nebi," they didn't say that. That would have been disrespectful. "We have no need to answer you in this matter." Now, what you got to understand is they're not being disrespectful here. They're not trying to be like, "Yo, what's up? We got you. Oh, we got a big God. You're a little man." And that's not what they're saying. That's not what they're doing here. They're saying, we have no need to answer you in this matter. But verse 17 says this: "If this be so, our God whom we serve." Notice the distinction. There's a God between that you serve and the God that we serve is able. And I started thinking of the song, "God is able." You know what I'm talking about? The Hillsong song that was real popular there for a while. That one came to my mind. Sorry for that little serenation there. So I didn't mean to do that on stage. But it came to mind. The Spirit came over me. And it says, "And from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O King." So they're saying, we serve a big God who is capable of saving us. He will deliver us out of your hand. But I love this next statement, and this is where I get my title. This is where we get our main point for tonight. "But if not," and I like what the NLT says. It says, "even if he doesn't." And think about that. Even if he doesn't. "Be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up." Even if he doesn't. No matter what the case is, even if he doesn't, we refuse to worship this false non-God that you set up and thousands upon thousands of people are bowing down and worshiping to. We will not. You can just imagine the isolation that these three people feel in this story. To be the only ones to stand up for something like this. That's pretty bold. And we as Christians, as followers of Jesus, need to have a bold faith in our own life. And verse 19 says this: "Then Nebuchadnezzar, or King Nebi, was filled with fury." Remember, 0 to 60, he's upset. He's not happy. "And the expression of his face changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He ordered the furnace heated 7 times more than it usually heated." So that's pretty hot. I don't know about you guys. That's hot. "And he ordered some of the mighty men of his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and to cast them into the burning fiery furnace." And it's important for you to understand this part right here. Because what's happening is the scripture is really letting us know that this was a crazy, intense inferno. And then you see in verse 21, "Then these men who were bound in cloaks," so Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, bound in cloaks, their tunics and their hats and other garments, and they were thrown in the burning fiery furnace. Because the king's order was urgent, so the king was like, "No, we're not messing around. Let's kill these people now." And it says, "And the furnace overheated," and what I said, it's important to understand that these are mighty men putting in this. And it says, "And the flame of the fire killed those men who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego." So that lets you know that this isn't some sort of a scam or a sham of a fire. This fire was so hot, the people that put Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in were the ones that were killed because the heat was so intense. And that helps us understand the next parts. And then I see in verse 23, it says, "And these 3 men," say, "and these 3 men. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego fell bound in the burning fiery furnace." So they were thrown in there like shish kebabs, whatever they were thrown in there. I don't know, they were bound. You guys aren't supposed to be getting out. And then it says this, then verse 24, then King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished and rose in haste. So just imagine, it's like people gathered around a campfire. They're all just gathered around and watch Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego burn. You know, that's pretty. It says he rose in haste, and he declared to the counselors, did we not cast 3 men bound in the fire? I think this is an interesting question. Like 3 people, like you can remember 3 people. You know, I mean that's not a huge number. It's not like you have like 1,000. It's like, did we cast 3 people into this fire? And it says they answered the king, true, O king. To verse 25, he answered and said to them, but I see 4 men unbound walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt. Say, they are not hurt. They are not hurt. And the appearance of the 4th is like the son of the gods. So some people believe this may be an incarnate Jesus. Some people believe this may be an angel. I don't really know, but you see in this story, like he threw 3 people in, and now there's 4. Like we all know that you know that doesn't happen. That's not normal. Like 3 people don't multiply into 4 instantaneously. You know what I mean? And so you see this in this story, and I love the picture that it presents here in verse 26. And it says, then Nebuchadnezzar came near the door of the burning fiery furnace and declared, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out and come here. Now think of this right here. Notice who he left out. The 4th. Like he wanted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to come out, but the 4th person, you just stay in that fire. You stay where you're at. I don't want no part of you. I want nothing to do with you. You stay in the fire. But he says, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, come out. And I started thinking about, in Scripture, when you see people that have God encounters, you see the awe and the fear, like the Apostle Paul when he had a God encounter. You see him and the people around him. When you see when God appeared to the Jewish people on the mountain, the awe and fear that was all around everybody. So King Nebi was like, everybody come out except that dude. I want all of you guys to come out. And so we're going to see King Nebuchadnezzar go from 0 to 60 here in a second. And I was thinking about this, I wrote this down, and it says this: sometimes in life you have to go through the fire in order to be refined. Think about that. Sometimes you have to go through the fire in order to be refined. And that's what happened here. You have Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego have been put in a situation that's extremely tough, extremely difficult, death or life situation. And they're being refined for the betterment. And verse 27 says this: and the satraps, the prefects, the governors, and the king, the counselors gathered together and saw that the fire had not had any power over the bodies of these men. The hair on their heads was not singed, their cloaks were not harmed, and no smell of fire had come upon them. And Matt and Eric, if you guys want to come back up. But notice this. Notice that there is witnesses, that it's not just King Nebuchadnezzar seeing this. Everyone is noticing what's just happened. Everyone is seeing what has happened, that these men were thrown in this fire. Remember, the mighty men were killed. But Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego lived. And verse 28, Nebuchadnezzar answered them and said, blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel to deliver his servants. So you have King Nebi going from 0 to 60. In 1 minute, he was wanting to worship a dead statue. And now he's talking about the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And he said, and who has trusted him and set aside the king's command and yielded up their bodies rather than to serve and worship any god except their own. So now he's giving them praise for disobeying him, because they worship the one true God. And therefore I make a decree. So we have King Nebuchadnezzar making another wonderful decree. He has a new decree. And he says that, and I think he just spouts these things off the top of his head. And he says, any people, nation, or language that speak anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be torn limb from limb, and their houses laid in ruins. So we're not just talking about them. We're talking about their houses being torn. We're talking about everything that they own being destroyed. For there is no other God who is able to rescue in this way. So my question then becomes for King Nebuchadnezzar, do you truly believe in the gods that you say you believe in? Because he's literally seen this one miracle of these 3 men not being burned to death with fire, and instantly he's come to the conclusion that there is no other God that can do what he just witnessed and what he saw. That's a powerful statement. And then in verse 30 it says this, then the king prompted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. And notice this as well, they were promoted. And I wrote this here too. It says, maybe your promotion is dedicated to your promotion. And that rhymes. So I like that. But maybe your promotion is dictated on your devotion. Like maybe God's wanting to do something through you and to you. But he's wanting to make sure first that you're completely his. That you're completely sold out for him. And as I was reading this story and as I was thinking about this story as well, I ran across something that said this, but where was Daniel in all of this? Like, you know what I mean? Like in this whole story, like it's the book of Daniel, but Daniel's not mentioned one single time in this story. And there's maybe a few theories or thoughts and some things that I came across and heard about was maybe Daniel was out of the country. And King Nebuchadnezzar did this because he knew that if he did this with Daniel here, he would end up having to do something with Daniel. Like, we don't know where Daniel is. We don't know why Daniel wasn't present in this story. But obviously, he wasn't there, and Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego were promoted. And you begin to see these Jewish people that put their faith and trust in God over and over again. God was faithful to them. But it all comes back to my title that I had tonight. Is simply this. Even if he doesn't. Think about that. Even if he doesn't. Even if God doesn't. They're going to say, even if we're burned to death in this fire, we will not worship your gods. But maybe we can try to put that in our own life, in our own way that we live. What is maybe this? And a lot of us are praying for things. A lot of us are praying and believing for God to do some miraculous things in our life. But maybe simply this. What if, even if he doesn't heal you of your cancer? Even if he doesn't heal you of your disease? Or maybe even this. Even if he doesn't bring your child home to you? Or your child from drug addiction, or even if he doesn't let you keep your job, even if he doesn't give you that wife or that husband that you're looking for, even if he doesn't, will you still worship him? And I think that's a powerful thought. Even if he doesn't. And so that's the type of faith that we're going to see here in the book of Daniel. You see that even if he doesn't kind of faith. And that is something that we should strive for as Christians, and we should just strive for in our own lives. That no matter what the cost, we are going to stand for God when everybody else is bowing down to the world. And that's what we desire. And that's what here at Awakening Church of God. Like, obviously, we're not facing a situation like this, but we as Christians, we compromise in the little things. I compromise in the little things at times. The little things of whatever, maybe staying pure or treating our coworkers correctly or whatever, but we bow down to those things. But we have to come to the place and ask God, help me come to the place where I'm an even if he doesn't Christian. That no matter what happens, God, you are who I'll look to, and you are who I'll worship, no matter the cost. Church, let's pray.